Hey friends, Will here. I recently stopped using a Canon camera for my video work and I picked up a Panasonic GH5. When I was shopping around, the choice it came down to for me really was, do I go Panasonic or do I go for the Sony sort of A-series cameras? So that's what I want to talk about today, why I decided to go for Panasonic over Sony. So yeah, after months of shopping around, scratching my head, reading reviews, watching videos, I picked up the Panasonic GH5, and that is what you're watching right now, and it's what all my videos now are shot on. Now, leaving Canon, that wasn't an easy decision to make for me. I'd had a Canon, it was my sort of first camera. I'd had it for a couple of years. I got very used to it. I'm a big fan of the Canon sort of ecosystem, but I did another video where I talked in depth about the reasons why I was deciding to leave Canon. So if not Canon, then the next decision I needed to make was what instead. So I'd seen a lot of people really rave about the Sony cameras, A7 III, the A7R Mark II, A7S Mark II. These are all very popular cameras for filmmaking. And then in the other camp is the sort of Panasonic people who talk about how much they love the GH5 specifically and the GH5S, and generally talking about the Micro Four Thirds kind of format. So it was a really challenging decision, and I ended up with the Panasonic GH5. So today I just want to cover my rationale really. Now what I would say is everything I'm going to say today is all just my opinion, okay? This is not necessarily derived from absolute hard facts, as is the case with anyone buying anything. It has to feel right, and there are definitely certain elements of the GH5 which are not as good as the Sony cameras, and vice versa. So this is just why I chose to go for the Panasonic, and maybe my thinking and my rationale around this might be helpful if you are asking yourself a similar question at the moment. So what I will say is I went to the photographic show in Birmingham in March, I think it was, and I spent like a lot of time at the Panasonic stand and a lot of time at the Sony stand, and I spoke to some ambassadors about both of the sort of cameras I was looking at. Now at the time the A7 III hadn't come out yet, and if I was gonna go down the Sony road, I was considering the A7S Mark II. Because of its amazing low light capabilities, okay? That camera is more expensive, much more expensive than the GH5. So that was a consideration at the time, but that wasn't the deal breaker for me. So first off, I just want to talk about things about the GH5 that really tipped it for me, okay? First of all was the image quality, the ability to shoot 10-bit 422 4K. That felt like something that was really good and something that was going to sort of future-proof me for a good amount of time into the future. Now the Sonys shoot 8-bit, so still a really good quality 4K, but I just felt like it seemed like the Panasonic had the edge over the actual video quality. Also, this is again personal preference, but I feel like the colour science of the Panasonics is a little bit better than the Sonys. I've seen a lot of videos online of people talking about how hard you have to work with the Sonys to get really good colour from them, and that put me off a little bit. That might be completely false, but my perception of it was that the Panasonics just have slightly better colour versus the Sony, and slightly better 4K quality. Next up, I felt like the lens system that you're going to get with the Panasonic, it felt like quite a nice move into the Micro Four Thirds world. Some really good lenses available, and price wise maybe slightly more affordable than obviously the full frame options that you're looking to use with the Sony. So that was a consideration. I picked up the Panasonic Lumix G 12 to 35 f2.8 with image stabilization. That's what I'm filming on right now. It's so tiny compared to the full frame equivalent, which is the sort of the Canon L series 24 to 70, which is massive. This is quite refreshing to have such a small sort of lens on the body. Next up, build quality for me was a big one. I held the Sony and it just didn't really do it for me. It didn't feel as rugged, as solid, as well put together as the Panasonic. Coming from Canon, I love the Canon build quality, and when I picked up the Panasonic GH5, it just felt like a good, solid camera. It felt like it could go anywhere with me. It was going to last. It could, you know, take a few knocks and stuff. And the Sony just felt a bit flimsy to me in comparison. And that leads me on really to the next thing, which was the screen. So the screen on the Sony, it doesn't have a flip out screen for a start, which I really do find that to be very helpful for, you know, if I'm filming high or low or in bright light, you can tilt it around. If I'm filming myself, like now, I've got the screen just there, flipped around so I can monitor what's going on. So that was a consideration for me. Also, the quality of the actual touch screen, the Sony is not good from what I played with. You know, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, but to me the Sony touchscreen seemed really poor, and the quality of the actual screen did not seem great either. With Panasonic, it feels like a very good, robust flip out screen. It flips around, it's bright, it's got really nice responsive touch. It's been really nice to use so far, so that was another reason why I decided to go for the GH5. And then it's worth mentioning as well, and this one is perhaps a little tricky, cost-wise, right? The GH5 was considerably cheaper than the A7S II. Now, obviously, since picking up this camera, the A7 III has come out, which is really on par, very much on par with the cost of the GH5. However, if you go for the A7 III, then you are looking at full frame lenses, and maybe some of those full frame lenses are going to cost you a little bit more than their Micro Four Thirds counterparts. So there is an element, and certainly size wise, those lenses are going to be much bigger for the A7 III. So yeah, cost was a consideration. It's not the be all and end all. If cost was not an issue, I may well have gone and bought myself a Canon, you know, video camera like a C200 or something, or a 1DX Mark II, because I was quite happy with Canon. But because cost was an issue, I wanted a good quality 4K video camera, and my budget was kind of set. So that is that. So yeah, they're the main reasons why I chose Panasonic. Probably also worth mentioning that there are a few things which actually really put me off Panasonic, and they've been the sort of the pill I've had to swallow, so to speak. So those things are sensor size. Going to a Micro Four Thirds sensor was a massive roadblock for me. It took me a while to get my head around it. Since I've had it, I've not had any problems with it, but what I would say is there's a few reasons why that sensor size is an issue for me. Firstly, the ability to shoot in low light. Obviously, the smaller your sensor, the less light can get onto it, which does mean the GH5 is not a low light camera. Secondly, the depth of field. So that Micro Four Thirds format just does not have the ability to deliver the same blurry backgrounds that you might be used to if you're shooting with full frame. Now, I'm okay with that, and there are actually a few approaches that you can use in order to still get that nice depth of field on the GH5. I won't be able to explore that for a little while because I've just spent all my money on the camera and lens I've bought, but you know, things like the Metabone speed booster and buying, you know, faster lenses with wider apertures. So you can sort of, you know, there's things you can do to get around it, but it's certainly not as easy as just sticking a fast lens on the full frame Sonys and getting that amazing blurry background that we all love so much. So that was a tricky one. That was the main thing for me, really, was the full frame sensor. It took me a little while to kind of get around that. and come to terms with it. But since having the camera, I found it to be, you know, great, actually. So yeah, I think that's it really. Hopefully that sort of answers the question why I chose to go for the Panasonic line rather than the Sony's. In a perfect world, I'd probably have both, you know, but it's not a perfect world, is it? And for now, I'm very pleased with the functionality that I'm getting from the Panasonic GH5. Oh, one other thing, autofocus. So the Sony uses a phase detect autofocus, and the Panasonic is contrast based, so the Sony has way better autofocus, and that was another big thing for me. But actually, having the GH5, I'm finding the autofocus to be pretty good, especially with the new 2.3 firmware update, finding it to be pretty reliable. I know it's never going to be as good as the Sony's or the Canon dual pixels, but I'm not finding it bad. You know, it's still a pretty robust focusing system for what I used it for. So yeah, that's it. They're the main reasons I chose to get the Panasonic GH5 and the few things which I found hard to get my head around. And if you are looking to buy a new camera and you're asking yourself the same question that I was, then hopefully my thoughts on that might just help you make your decision. And I'm not saying that you should get the Panasonic. You may say that the sensor size, the depth of field and the autofocus are far more important than any of the other things that I've mentioned are pros about the GH5, and you might say it's absolutely, I'm going to go with the Sony. But whatever you decide, I hope you found the video helpful, and other than that, I'll see you next time.